so she can put them on the paper, and that way we can kind of share. I know I take one, and then I know several people take them, but if you need something to pray for, which we all should be praying for one another, take one of those prayer requests. We all have time to pray. Despite how many kids or how busy life is, there's always time to pray. There's a necessity for prayer in the body, especially for one another. And so just make sure that you're picking that up. And yeah. So Genesis chapter 50, but we'll recap chapter 49. There's a couple things that I forgot, just one thing that I forgot to mention last week, but we see that Jacob blesses, actually we did 48 and 49 last week. So Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, and so we went through all the tribes of Israel. We mentioned that, it's when they go through the tribes, it's mentioned Ephraim and it's mentioned Manasseh. But then we see in Revelation, Ephraim's not mentioned, but Manasseh is. And in that place of Ephraim, it says Joseph, the tribe of Joseph there. And so just that to point out, but he blesses the sons. And remember the situation where he brings them to his father to receive the blessing from them. And what happens, he places them in order with Manasseh on the right, and Ephraim on the left, in order so that they would get the right blessings for what Joseph thought would be correct. Right? And so as they start to bless him, Jacob switches his hands over. And so he was confused, and he looks at him and said, Father, are you sure you're doing this the right way? No, that's not the right one. He goes, no, I know exactly what I'm doing, because the Lord had already revealed it to him of what would happen, of who was supposed to get the blessing and everything. And so that situation happens, and then we get to Jacob's last words, right? In chapter 49, and he goes through all of his sons, and he pretty much gives them the prophecy / blessing for each of them. We went through each and every one. And the one that I kind of wanted to just touch on again was Joseph. And remember, as we're reading this, we always remember that Joseph is an image of Christ through the Old Testament. And so he starts to describe him in verse 22, and he talks about this bow, right? B-O-U-G-H. And it means a branch, right? So when he's talking about Joseph, he's saying it's a fruitful bow. He is a fruitful bow or a branch. A fruitful bow by a well. His branches run over the wall. And so they reach other people. He's a fruitful kind of guy, which we should all be fruitful. I think one of the best time to have neighbors is when their tree goes over your yard, right? And it starts to, like oranges, those are the best. I'm sorry, but if their tree goes over to your yard, you're like, oh yeah, this is the best. You get free oranges, right? And so that's kind of what Joseph, he's fruitful in that it's so much that it's running over this wall. And so he blesses them. And, we go through Benjamin. We talked about Benjamin being like this ravenous wolf, this fighting kind of spirit. And then we get to Jacob's death. And Jacob's had very specific instructions for his burial. In verse 29, it says, then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me in my father's cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Remember in Genesis chapter 20, I think it's 23 or 29. I forget. I think I wrote it down somewhere. 23. When Abraham had bought this land, and so that way they can have it for when they died. And then 50 is going to continue with the request of Jacob. And so then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him. Now, Jacob had just passed. He breathed his last. And he wept over him and he kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants and the physicians to embalm his father. And so the physicians embalmed him, Israel. 40 days were required of him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. So now notice that it says the Egyptians mourned for him. The Egyptians mourned for him. He's not even part of their people. But it was because of who they knew. Right? Who were they related to? They were tied to Joseph. And so even they mourned for him out of respect for him. And I just think that's so significant that the Egyptians were now mourning for this Hebrew man. And notice that it says that they mourned for him 70 days. A royal mourning, a royal ritual, whatever you want to call it, would have been 72 days. So if Pharaoh had died, they would have mourned and done all these things for 72 days. And we see Israel here, or Jacob, who had no role in their kingdom and their empire, anything like that, and yet he gets as close as possible to this royal treatment as he dies. And now, when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am dying in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back." And Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear." So he finds favor in the sight of Pharaoh. Not that he's had an issue to this point, but he lets him know, like, hey, this is what my father wanted. And notice, even though he's second-handed in whatever, he's not demanding it. He's not saying, I need to go. He's still asking for permission. He's being a servant. He's being humble. He's not putting himself above other people. Not that he could put himself above Pharaoh. But notice he's still asking to do this for him. But notice, going back, the reason that they've treated him so well is because of Joseph, who they knew. Right? And that's much like us. If we say Joseph is this Old Testament picture of Jesus, it's all about who you know. Right? We say that even today, depending on the job or whatever it may be, that, it's all about who you know. If you know the right people, then you're going to get to the right places. But for us, if we don't know Jesus, then life is meaningless. There's no point to life. It really is all about who you know. But you got to know Jesus. If not, life is pointless. It means nothing to us. It means nothing to anyone. But then also, if you would maybe just note it, Philippians 4, chapter 6, I'm just going to mention it real quick. That when he says this, when we talk about Pharaoh and we talk about Joseph finding favor in the sight of Pharaoh, I thought about Philippians 4. What does it say? It says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." We can't be anxious for anything, but instead we have to pray and surrender those requests to God. And at this point we see he surrendered, maybe not to God, but to Pharaoh. He was making his request known, and God made Pharaoh find favor with Joseph. And so Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, and the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen. And they went up with him, both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. Now, this was an honorable funeral or celebration of life, whatever you would call it. He got the priestly treatment, I would say, or the king's treatment, because it says, they left all the kids behind, but he was taken by chariots and horsemen. They describe it as a very great gathering. This wasn't just something that, they did mourn. It's important to know that it's okay to mourn, because often we think that, as believers, that we can't cry, right? If another believer dies, we're like, oh, I'm not supposed to cry because they're in heaven with the Lord, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to mourn. When we look at Matthew, what does he say? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So it's okay to cry. Yes, we know that they're going to heaven, and that's okay. That's a great thing. That's why often people will call it celebrations of life, not a funeral, because there is no fun in funerals. It's not at all. And so, but we're celebrating this person that's reached this next level of life, that it's like now they get to spend eternity with Christ. Now they get to spend eternity with them. But notice that's only if we know Jesus. There is no other way around that. Often it's when we go to funerals and we go to things like that where people will say, oh man, I know they're smiling down at me right now. Not if they didn't know Jesus. And that's the truth. But because, people are so close to us, because they mean to us, we'd like to think that. We'd like to think that, but the hard truth about it is if they didn't know Jesus, then it is not a celebration of life. There's nothing to celebrate there. And that's why it's so important that we make sure that, much like Joseph, that he was bearing good fruit, that we're bearing good fruit to the people around us. Are people's lives changed because of us? Not just because of our strength and our knowledge or what we know about God, but because of who God is. Are they changed by the Lord through us? I mentioned a couple weeks ago that my friends, and I've never have told them anything, but by the way that I live, even before I went and left off to Bible college, that I stopped cussing, I stopped doing all these things, and because of that, I had friends that stopped doing that. And I have friends that he hasn't stopped doing anything that he does, but he'll cuss and he'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, if you're convicted about that, then you should probably stop cussing. Like, because I didn't tell him not to. I've never told him anything like that. I never said, hey, don't cuss when you're around me. That's not right. I'm a pastor. No, I've never told him that. But when he does it, he catches himself and he's convicted. Why? Because I represent Christ. And so when we do that, people should, if they're behaving wrongly, then they should feel some sort of conviction around us. Let me tell you this. People should not be comfortable in their sin around us. They shouldn't. If they're comfortable and they say, oh, yeah, no, I can do it. Jed's cool. I'll do it with him. He's fine. He don't mind. Then what does that say about us? What does that say about the witness that we're leaving for other people? And so then they came to the threshing floor at Adad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father, and when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning of the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Therefore, the name is called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Notice how he doesn't say this is a deep mourning of the Hebrew people, of his son, of his family. No, he says this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. The Egyptian people, out of respect for Joseph, but also understand that Israel had also spent 17 years here. It doesn't give us any insight onto the life that he lived while he was there. But maybe he had such an effect on the people around him and loved them so much as Christ would, that the people began to care about him. And they began to see him as one of their own. And so his sons did for him as he had commanded them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought in the field once again in Genesis chapter 23. This is pretty much their family's land. Isaac was buried here, Rebekah was buried here, and Leah. And so they bought the field from Ephraim the Hittite as property for the burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. And then verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us, and he may actually repay us for all the evil that we did to him. And so they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of your servant, of the servants of God your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. So here's this picture. What the first thing that crosses the brothers' mind, because they know they did wrong to him, even though that we read a couple chapters ago, right? When he revealed himself to them, they were shocked. They couldn't get any words out. And what does he say? He says, don't hold those things that you did to me against yourselves. It's because it was not you, but God sent me here. He knew that that was the will of the Father for him. He was submitting to that. And yet the first thing, even though he truly forgave them, they were scared that he was only nice to them because their father was alive. They thought, oh, now that he's dead, he's not going to live to please Dad. He's going to kill us. He's going to repay us now for what we did. And you know that a guilty conscience will always rob us of having normal interactions. Right? Because we're always thinking about these. There's some things that we haven't gotten rid of, that we're holding on to. They're going to withhold us from all the normal interactions that we would have with people. And so, also, they do the same thing as their father did. Remember Jacob and Esau? Right? When he heard Esau was coming, what did he do? He sent all these gifts. He sent everything. He sent all the servants and said, hey, tell my brother this. So tell him these things. And what do they do here? They sent the servant. They say, hey, tell Joseph this is what my dad said. This is what Dad said. Dad said to remember this. So that they were fearful, but they didn't truly accept the forgiveness of Joseph. And often that's time people of the world, it's hard for them to accept the forgiveness that God gives them. That when we forgive them, it often doesn't make sense to them. They can't fully comprehend why we would do that. And that's exactly what we see here. It didn't make sense. They thought it was just a phase or whatever it is. But notice what Joseph does. He says, and Joseph wept when they spoke to him. This wept is not, he's not sobbing, crying. He's not saying, oh my gosh, my brothers, ah. No, but it's kind of a silent weeping. Right? He has tears rolling down his face, but he's weeping. He's weeping, why? Because probably thinking that, man, we're past this. I mean, we spent these 17 years together. Like, I haven't done anything to you guys. I love you guys. I've had forgiveness. And yet, this is how they think of him. And then his brothers also went and they fell down before his face. And they said, behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. For am I in the place of God? He said, I'm not God. I'm not the judge. Often people do think they are the judge. Right? It's so easy as Christians to judge other people and say, oh yeah, that person's not saved. How do you know? How do we know? We don't, because we're not the judge. We don't know what's going to happen in their last days. Are they going to cry out to God? Will God save them? And I think that's so important for us to never do that. Never assume somebody's eternity, where they're going to spend eternity at. Because we would love to, we do often, maybe not you guys, but I've caught myself doing it, like, oh, well, how are they? Or, they'll say, well, what about these people? What do you think about them? I said, well, I don't know if they're saved. Like, I don't think, who am I to say that? I don't know. Now, I can say, at this moment, they're not living a godly lifestyle. They're not living the way that God has called us to live according to His will, according to His word. We can, I don't know, maybe we can assume, but we can never say for sure that, hey, this is where this person is going, because we don't know, and we're not the judge. But often people do think that. But this is where Joseph says, who am I? Because I don't take the place of God. I'm not the judge of you guys. And he says this, but as for you, you meant evil against me. But he's also saying, hey, your life is not in my hands. I think that's also what Joseph could have meant there when he says, am I in the place of God? He goes, I don't control your life. I'm not Lord over your life. He goes, that's for God to do. And we can't be the Holy Spirit. We can't be God for people. If that makes sense. We can't be the person that's saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do this. Like, no. If that's all the case, it's all going to be work-based. You have to allow people to truly seek the Lord and allow the Lord to change them. It's not our job to change people. Although we would love to, and we often try to, it's not our job. It's the Holy Spirit. Because at this point, if we're the ones that are making them change, were they changed because of the power of Christ and the work of the cross? Or because they want to please us and make us happy? No, so it's important that we allow the Lord to be Lord over people's lives. We're not to be that person in their life. We're not to be the Holy Spirit or act as we are. But God meant it for good in order to bring it about, as it is to this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So a couple weeks ago, we also seen this when I just mentioned that chapter when he revealed himself to his brother. He said, it wasn't you guys, it was God who sent me here. We talked about Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. It's very specific wording. It doesn't. Often people will stop there. All things work together for the good, and they'll leave it there. They'll say, yep, I like that life verse, get it tattooed on me, put it up in my house, put that sign up, decor. But the whole verse says, to those who love me. If people don't love God, all things are not working together for good. Those trials are not working together for good. The bad things that are happening to them are not working for good. Because it's only for those who love God. It's very specific. We can't tell people who are not believers and say, yeah, you know what? God is working everything for your good today. No, he's not. Sorry. But he's not. Because it's to those who love God. And that's why he said, and that's exactly where Joseph was. And that's why he says, but God meant it for good. Because he loved God. But what was the purpose of all of this? And I would say this. Do we know that all things are working together for God's good right now? All the trials that we face, and even before we knew the Lord, everything that has happened to us, do we know that, hey, this was God's hand in everything to make it for his good? To glorify him in the end? The hardships that we went through, do we understand that, hey, this is God's perfect will for my life? It may be hard to understand. It may be hard to grasp the full concept of it, but it is often that, if we love God, then we know all the bad things that have happened are for his good. They're going to glorify him. Oh man, I had a miscarriage. I had this. I was addicted. I lost my dad. I lost this. And it's like, okay, hey, but when you love God, God's going to somehow, some way out of this dark situations, bring glory to him. And we just got to be thankful. We don't understand it. I'll never understand it. And I might have shared a couple weeks ago, like, I longed for, great parents and all these things. And I thought, man, this would be awesome if I had this. And it would have been. But that was not God's will for my life. It wasn't. It wasn't to have a perfect home. It was to have a broken home. Parents that were on drugs. To have a brother that was in a gang. It was all these things were to mold and shape me into who God has called me to be. That was God's perfect will for my life. And much like Joseph, the life of Joseph, this was God's perfect will for him. Despite all the things that he went through. It was God's perfect will. Why? Because it says, to save many people alive. And so he tells them, don't be afraid. I'm going to provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and he spoke kindly to them. What a good representation of Christ here. That they should have gotten a punishment. They should have. For all the things that they did to Joseph, they should have been punished. He could have punished them. He could have brought down the hammer on them, but he didn't. Instead, he shows grace and he shows mercy. That they don't receive the punishment for their sin. They don't receive the punishment for all the wrong things that they did to him. But yet they receive grace and they receive mercy. And I think this is also going back to save many people alive, how important our testimony is to people. To not be afraid to share those things that you have went through and that God has pulled us out of. Because often, testimonies will be, oh man, I used to do this, I was a part of this, I used to do this, I used to. And then God saved my life and that's it. So, what do you mean? That's it? That's where it ends there? No, because it seems that we just brought glory to the past in the shortest part of our testimony, and then God saved me and that was it. No, the testimony does not stop there. It's, hey, these are all the things that God has freed me from. These are the things that he's protected me from. This is the way that he saved my life. This is the way that he saved my kid's life. This is why I serve the Lord. Because he was faithful through all those seasons of life, and he's still faithful now. So it's important that we're not ashamed to share the things that we went through in order to minister to people, because you never know who you're talking to. And people often say, sometimes you have 30 seconds, between 30 seconds and a minute, to catch somebody as your street witnessing, as they call it. Going out there and spreading the gospel or trying to preach to people. You often only have 30 seconds to a minute that people will give you before they walk away. Average, obviously some people stay longer. But man, what are you going to say in that short amount of time? What are the main things? Man, I'm sure, we all have our own great testimonies. I'm sure, I know some people that I work with that, have survived cancer. All these things, people hear that word and they run, right? Like, no way. No way. So survived all these hardships in life with their health, with their kids that don't follow the Lord, kids that have walked away, people that have hurt them, father and mother, aunts, uncles, whatever it is. And we have all these things that, man, are impactful to us and that are so important in our testimony to show the glory of God. So it's important that we do share those things. That we're able to share, hey, this was God's purpose for my life. That, hey, much like Jeremiah, they call him the weeping prophet often because he only had one convert in 30 years of ministry. I'd probably cry too, right? You do 30 years of ministry, you're preaching to a bunch of people, and only one person gives their life to the Lord. You're like, man, if you were to look at numbers, you're like, man, was this all a waste? Was this all a waste that I served God for 30 years and I only converted one person? And it's not. But just think of what even if it was one person that you shared your testimony with and they were able to turn to the Lord after that, man, what would that mean? That all of heaven will be rejoicing. And that should be enough for us. That heaven is rejoicing over one soul that is saved. And so Joseph, in verse 22, dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. And Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up to Joseph's knees. So think about, man, I can only imagine what it's like, because as parents, you kind of got to be the enforcer, right? You got to be the one, you're responsible for raising the kid's life, right? You're responsible to raise them. The grandparents, it's like the easiest thing ever. They just come in and they can do whatever they want. And so it's not their responsibility to raise the kid. And so I can only imagine what joy that Joseph probably felt here, that he was able to see his grandkids. I don't know, I've always, in my own life, I've always seen that grandkids, maybe it's not true, but it seems like they just love their grandkids way more than their kids. I don't know, that's just what it seems like. When I get there, maybe I'll understand. But I think, because you're not responsible. You could just be the fun person in their life. Who knows? I don't know. But I just think it's probably such a rewarding thing to see not only your son and your kids to follow up the Lord and the will for life, but then now you get to see their grandkids and their kids and their kids. Right? To have this family, and this is the purpose of it all. This is why we're living. It's not about, how much stuff we have and all. It's all about, man, what do we leave our kids with? What are we leaving them with? And the answer should be God. That they would have a foundation in Christ, that they wouldn't walk away. To raise them up in the ways of the Lord. And I often have to ask myself all the time, Lord, what does it mean to raise them up in the ways of the Lord? Like, I'm not you. I'm not perfect. I don't know what I'm doing. This kid don't listen. I thought he's supposed to. Like, what's going on? And so I'm figuring it out every single day. Every 5 minutes I'm having to remind myself. Patience, love, long suffering. All these things that come to my mind. I don't know what it means to raise up the kids in the way of the Lord. Because every kid is different. Every kid needs a different amount of love. Every kid needs a different amount of grace. Every kid needs a different amount of discipline. So for me, I would say this. Pray how to raise each and every single kid of yours. I don't know. I don't have all the answers because I'm not God. But that's often what I have to do. I'm like, Lord, how do I show him that I love him, but also how do I discipline him at the same time? Like, I'm just there like, Lord, I don't want, like, I forget where it comes from, but, I think it's Ephesians. There's, fathers, don't raise up your kids and get angry at them, or I forget, paraphrase, of course, but to where they grow up and they resent you when they're older. I pray that never happens. That I was so hard on my kids, and I was more worried about being the enforcer than rather showing grace and mercy, that they grow up to resent me. I would hate for that to happen. I don't want that to happen. But it starts with praying to God. It starts with praying, Lord, how do I do this? How? Every single day I got to wake up, Lord, what am I doing? How do I do this? How do I make sure me and my wife are on the same team? How do I serve this kid? Because, my first son, he is wild. He is wild. That's all I will say. But he's gentle and kind at the same time. I'm like, and then, you tell him, you yell at him, no, don't do that, don't do that. Don't stick your finger in there, like, don't do that. And and he'll smile at you, or you're just telling him no, and it's like, how can I be mad at this kid? So I'm trying to figure out, I don't know what it is, and I'm still learning. I'm 2 years in, and I think it's okay, they're still alive, so. But it's rewarding to see, like, hey, this is what we leave our kids with. We leave them with Christ. We plant the seeds. The Lord has to be the one that waters it. The Lord is going to be the one that grows it. He's going to bring the increase. It's not going to be us. We have to, how do I say this? We have to make sure that we teach our kids that it's not that we have to serve God, have to do this, have to do this. We should want to. There should be a want to go to church. And I think a lot of it comes off of us as parents, or even, not even maybe just parents, but even people around us. What's our attitude when we go to church? Is it, I gotta go to church because I gotta do this. I told them I would be there this Sunday, so I gotta go. Because then now, the people that are around us, our kids that are watching us, are gonna have that same attitude. Oh man, Mom doesn't want to go, Dad doesn't want to go, they don't seem excited to go, so I'm not going to be excited to go. Man, we got to teach the people that are living with us, that are around us, hey, being able to read the Word freely, it's a privilege. It's an amazing thing that there's life within this book. That church is not boring. Church is fun. And I pray, and maybe I fall short, but I pray I would never come here and preach a boring sermon. I pray that I don't. Maybe you're thinking, Jed, you're doing it right now. I don't know, but I don't want to make the Bible boring because it's not. The Bible is not a boring book. It's a life-changing book. And so I'll continue and stop talking about that. But then Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, which is Canaan. And then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. And so Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Now this is different. Joseph dies, but they didn't carry him to Canaan. They didn't carry him to the same place that Abraham was buried at. They didn't care. What does it say? They embalmed him. He was in a coffin in Egypt. Different here. I don't know why. I mean, probably because he was technically a ruler in Egypt, and so they kept him there. Maybe the brothers didn't speak up if they wanted him back, in the land where his fathers were buried at. I don't know. But notice what he says. He says, God will be with you. God's going to be the one to free you. He's going to visit you. And it's important for us to know that if we want freedom, we got to turn to God. If we want to be in bondage, then we can turn to the world. But if we want freedom, we want joy, we want peace, we want all these things that God offers, then we have to turn to him. We can't, just serve self. But notice that he was put in a coffin in Egypt. They embalmed him, much like they would do to, I didn't pay much attention in history, but I know we learned about some people in Egypt that were, I can't think of any of the names. I had this picture in my mind of like this guy with like a blue and gold little helmet thing and like a little goatee that's like braided. I don't know, King Tut maybe, is that in Egypt? Okay, yep. See, something like that. Be embalmed, put in a coffin in Egypt to kind of, in a sense, preserve their body, but not, they're dead, but to kind of preserve it in the best way possible. So hey, could we find Joseph's body in Egypt? Maybe, yeah. Not going to find Jesus. It's empty. But maybe Joseph, because they embalmed him in the way that they would in anybody else in Egypt that would have passed away. And so notice this, I want to close with this. I know I said I was going to do a recap of Genesis, but I don't have a lot of time. But I would say this, in Genesis chapter 1, I've heard somebody say it, and I'm going to steal it. People say the best thieves are often Christians. right? But I was told by a pastor, he goes, you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. You steal from 2 to 3, it's research. So Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Someone had said, if you can get someone to believe that, then the rest of the Bible should be easy to understand. Right? Because this is the hardest part, that in the beginning, God created everything. That God created the heavens and the earth. If we can get someone to believe that, then the rest of the Bible should be easy. Because, often people, I don't really believe that this would have happened. Well, do you believe that God created the heavens and the earth? Yes. Well, then why don't you believe that he can do this? You don't believe that God can raise people from the dead? You don't believe that he can do miracles, even though he created everything? Because people will say, there's no way that God could have done that. Well, who would have done it? There has to be a creator. Because if I were to told you, hey, you know what? This building was a rock, and in the snap of a finger and a twinkle of an eye, all of a sudden, they had electrical wiring, the lights were all working, they had a coffee shop, the floors were done, the chairs were there. You'd be like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. There's no way that it would just happen in a second like that. And you'd be like, yes, exactly. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. There had to be a creator that had done all this. But Joseph, in closing, we'll start Exodus next week. Maybe, I don't know what I want to do. I might just take a break and do like a psalm or a proverb. I'm not sure. I still haven't made up my mind. I usually make it up last minute. But Joseph, this is the will of God for his life. He was left for dead, sold to slavery, accused of taking advantage of an officer's wife, been thrown into prison. But had these things not happened to him, he wouldn't fill out his purpose, which was what, in the earlier verses, to save many people. He wouldn't have been able to have done it. Had he not been thrown into jail, he would have never met the baker and the butler. He would have never been remembered by the baker or butler. I forget which one it was. I think it was the baker. Remembered that he would be able to interpret dreams. And he would never have been exalted by Pharaoh. That all this stuff would have never happened. Much like us with Jesus, right? Had Jesus not come, we wouldn't have the freedoms that we have. We wouldn't have all the same things. We wouldn't be freed from sin. We'd have to pay the price for it. But yet, he did come. And so now we can live freely. And so we'll pray, and once again, I don't know what we're going to start next week. And I feel less bad about taking, I don't know if it's 8 or 9 months going through the book of Genesis, because I was listening to a message on the way home, and he was like, we're just over a year of studying the book of Genesis, and I was like, I'm doing great on time.